Welcome, weary traveler. Tonight, we embark on a journey not of miles, but of history, a gentle passage along the most legendary trade route the world has ever known. Let your mind drift, and your breath slow, as we trace the ancient paths of the Silk Road. Imagine not a single, paved highway, but a vast, shimmering tapestry woven across continents. This is the first gentle truth we hold tonight: the Silk Road was never one road, but an intricate network of trade routes, a sprawling web of paths that stretched from the east to the west, connecting civilizations like distant stars. Feel the soft sand beneath your feet, or the gentle rocking of a ship on the sea, for this network included both land and maritime routes. It was a corridor of connection, a bridge between worlds. This incredible journey spanned a distance so vast it is almost beyond comprehension. From its eastern heart to its western shores, the primary land routes alone stretched for over 6,400 kilometers, or about 4,000 miles. Picture that distance, not as a challenge, but as a long, slow breath taken by the earth itself. Each mile was a whisper of exchange, a step taken by a merchant, a camel, or a scholar. Now, let us consider the name itself, a name that conjures images of luxury and mystery: the Silk Road. It earned this evocative title because of the single, most prized commodity that flowed from the east: Chinese silk, a fabric so light and fine it was said to be woven from the clouds. This exquisite material was the very heart of the trade, a secret held by the Han Dynasty for centuries. But the exchange was not always about profit. In the earliest days of this great connection, the trade was driven by a very specific need. Initially, the Chinese sought something strong and vital from the West. They traded their precious silk primarily for the powerful, sturdy horses of Central Asia, needed for their cavalry to defend their borders. A beautiful, delicate fabric exchanged for the strength of a warhorse, a perfect balance of East and West. As the years turned into centuries, the road became much more than a simple marketplace. It was a channel for the deepest parts of human experience. The Silk Road facilitated not only the movement of goods like spices, porcelain, and glass, but also the profound exchange of ideas, technologies, religions, and even diseases. Think of the quiet journey of Buddhism as it traveled from India to China, or the slow spread of paper-making technology from east to west. It was a cultural current, flowing gently but persistently. The story of the Silk Road's formal beginning is often tied to a single, brave explorer. It was the expedition of Zhang Qian, a Chinese official sent west by Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty around 138 BC, that is credited with opening up the first major trade links with the West. He was a pioneer, a man who ventured into the unknown and returned with the knowledge that the world was far larger and more connected than anyone had imagined. His journey began in the ancient capital of China, a city of great splendor and peace. The traditional starting point for the eastern routes was Chang'an, which is now known as modern Xi'an. Imagine the bustling markets, the scent of tea and spices, and the quiet determination of the caravans setting out from those ancient gates, beginning their long, slow walk into the setting sun. This grand exchange was not a fleeting moment in history. It was a constant, enduring presence that shaped the world for over a millennium. The routes remained active, in various forms, from the 2nd century BCE until the mid-15th century CE, meaning the Silk Road was a vital artery of global connection for more than 1,500 years. That is 15 centuries of slow, steady movement, of cultural mingling, and of peaceful, profitable exchange. And here is a final, calming thought as we conclude this first segment of our journey: though the routes were ancient, the name we use today is surprisingly modern. The evocative term, Silk Road, or Seidenstrasse in German, was not coined until the 19th century by the German geographer, Ferdinand von Richthofen. He gave a single, beautiful name to 1,000 years of quiet, complex history. Rest now, and let the gentle echo of those ancient caravans carry you deeper into sleep. We will continue our journey soon, following the footsteps of those who walked the path of silk and stars. Welcome back, dear traveler. Your eyes grow heavy as we continue our journey along the ancient pathways. We have learned how the Silk Road began, and now we venture deeper into the heart of this vast network. Let us explore the people who walked these routes, and the treasures they carried. Picture yourself now in a bustling marketplace, but do not rush. Move slowly, peacefully, through the crowds. The merchants you see around you are not solitary adventurers. Merchants traveling the Silk Road rarely journeyed alone, they formed caravans, traveling together in groups for protection and companionship. These were not small gatherings, but organized processions of traders, guides, and animals, moving together across the vast and often dangerous terrain. In numbers, there was safety. In unity, there was strength. These caravans needed more than courage and companions. They needed sustenance, shelter, and places to rest. And so, dotting the landscape like oases of comfort, there emerged a network of refuge. Caravanserais, large, fortified guest houses, were built along the Silk Road routes to provide lodging, food, and protection for traveling merchants and their animals. These structures became the heartbeat of the trade network, places where strangers became friends, where stories were exchanged, and where the weary could find rest. Imagine stepping into one of these havens after days of travel through harsh deserts or treacherous mountains. The cool courtyard, the smell of cooking food, the gentle sounds of other travelers, all of it a sanctuary in the wilderness. Now, let us speak of the treasures themselves. What moved along these routes? What was so precious that merchants risked their lives to transport it? We have already spoken of silk, that most luxurious of fabrics. But the Silk Road was far more than a single commodity. From China, merchants carried not only silk but also porcelain, tea, paper, and bronze products, each item a masterpiece of craftsmanship and ingenuity. The porcelain, in particular, was so fine and beautiful that it would eventually give the Western world a new word, China, a term that became synonymous with ceramic ware itself. But the flow of goods was not one-directional. From India came treasures equally magnificent. India contributed fabrics, spices, semi-precious stones, dyes, and ivory to the Silk Road trade. Imagine the scent of cardamom, cinnamon, and cloves wafting through the markets. These spices were not mere flavoring, they were precious as gold, used for medicine, preservation, and the most elaborate of feasts. The dyes, too, were treasured, allowing distant kingdoms to paint their worlds in colors previously unknown to them. And from Central Asia came its own wealth. Central Asian merchants traded cotton, horses, and precious metals along the Silk Road. The horses, as we learned earlier, were particularly valued by the Chinese, strong and swift creatures that became the foundation of mighty cavalry forces. The metals, silver, gold, and copper, were worked into intricate designs, creating objects of beauty and utility that traveled both east and west. Yet the most profound exchange along the Silk Road was not of material goods, but of something far more lasting. Buddhism, originating in India, traveled along the Silk Road and became deeply rooted in China, Korea, and Japan, fundamentally shaping the spiritual and artistic traditions of East Asia. Picture a Buddhist monk, walking the same paths as the merchants, carrying not bolts of silk but scrolls of wisdom. The religion spread not through conquest, but through quiet conversation, through the sharing of ideas in caravanserais and monasteries. Art styles changed, philosophies deepened, and entire civilizations were transformed by this gentle, persistent flow of spiritual knowledge. This exchange of ideas extended far beyond religion. Technologies such as papermaking, printing, and gunpowder traveled westward from China along the Silk Road, while glass-making techniques and astronomical knowledge moved eastward. Imagine the moment when a Chinese scholar first held paper made in the Western style, or when a Western craftsman learned the secrets of creating the finest porcelain. Knowledge, once shared, could never be unshared. It multiplied and evolved, creating new innovations that would reshape the world. The Silk Road was not merely a path for the exchange of goods and ideas. It was a living, breathing organism of human connection. Cities along the Silk Road, such as Samarkand and Bokhara, became cosmopolitan centers where merchants, pilgrims, scholars, and adventurers from dozens of different cultures lived side by side, creating vibrant communities of remarkable diversity. In these cities, a merchant from China might share a meal with a trader from Persia, while a Buddhist monk and an Arab scholar debated philosophy in the courtyard. These were places where the world came together, where differences were not feared but celebrated. And finally, let us rest with this thought: the Silk Road remained active and vital for over 1,500 years, not because of any single ruler's decree, but because it served the deepest human needs, the desire to trade, to learn, to connect, and to grow. For 15 centuries, this network endured through empires rising and falling, through wars and famines, through the changing of dynasties and the shifting of borders. It endured because it was built on something stronger than stone or steel. It was built on the universal human desire to reach beyond one's own horizon and touch the world beyond. Rest now, traveler. Let the gentle hum of the caravans fade into the distance as sleep draws near. We will continue our journey when you wake, deeper into the stories of those who walked these ancient paths. Welcome back, weary wanderer. We have journeyed far, and yet there is so much more to discover. As your eyelids grow heavier, let us venture into the heart of the Silk Road itself, the actual paths that merchants walked, and the perils they faced with quiet courage. The routes of the Silk Road were not simple highways. They were complex networks that split and merged, adapted to the seasons and the dangers of the land. The main overland routes from China to the west passed both to the north and south of the Taklamakan Desert, one of the most formidable and unforgiving landscapes on Earth. Picture this desert, a vast expanse of sand and stone, stretching endlessly beneath a merciless sun. The name itself means go in and you won't come out in the local language. Yet merchants chose to navigate around it, following routes that had been discovered through centuries of trial and error. Some chose the northern path, others the southern, but all knew the desert's power. The routes converged and diverged near the ancient city of Dunhuang. Near Dunhuang, the Silk Road routes divided, with traders choosing either the northern route around the Taklamakan or the southern route, depending on the season, their cargo, and the political situation of the time. Dunhuang itself became a crucial waypoint, a place where merchants paused to gather supplies, exchange information, and prepare themselves for the journey ahead. It was a threshold between the known world of China and the vast, mysterious lands beyond. But the Taklamakan was not the only natural obstacle. The Gobi Desert also presented a formidable challenge to Silk Road travelers, with its harsh conditions, extreme temperatures, and vast emptiness that could disorient even the most experienced navigator. Crossing the Gobi required not just physical strength but mental fortitude. Travelers reported mirages, the sounds of phantom voices calling from the dunes, and the constant fear of becoming lost in an ocean of sand. Yet they crossed it, again and again, driven by the promise of profit and the human desire to connect with distant lands. The journey across these deserts and mountains was not merely difficult, it was dangerous in ways that modern travelers can scarcely imagine. Bandits and robbers were a constant threat along the Silk Road, preying on merchant caravans and stealing valuable goods. These were not always organized criminals, but sometimes desperate people driven to theft by poverty and hunger. The merchants knew this danger well. They traveled in groups, hired armed guards, and moved with vigilance. Yet still, losses occurred. Some caravans never reached their destinations. Some merchants never returned home. Beyond the threat of human predators, nature itself posed relentless challenges. Merchants faced not only bandits in harsh deserts but also disease, extreme weather, and the constant threat of getting lost in unfamiliar terrain. A sudden sandstorm could bury a caravan. A fever could sweep through a group of travelers, leaving some dead and others too weak to continue. The mountains brought avalanches and treacherous passes where a single misstep meant falling into an abyss. Yet still, the merchants came. The rewards were great enough to justify the risks. As time passed and trade flourished, an alternative route emerged, one that avoided the deserts and mountains altogether. The maritime Silk Road developed as a sea-based trade network, connecting ports across the Indian Ocean, the South China Sea, and beyond, offering a sometimes safer and often faster alternative to the overland routes. Imagine trading the endless dunes for the endless waves. The sea had its own dangers, pirates, storms, and the constant threat of shipwreck, but for many merchants, the maritime route became preferable. The ships that sailed these waters were remarkable vessels. The maritime Silk Road was primarily sailed by Arab, Persian, and Indian merchants in ships called dhows, rather than by Chinese vessels. These dhows were elegant, efficient ships with triangular sails that caught the monsoon winds. The Arab and Persian merchants had centuries of experience navigating these waters, understanding the currents and the seasons. They became the masters of maritime trade, carrying goods between the East and the West, growing wealthy and powerful in the process. The maritime routes connected diverse regions in ways that transformed them. Numerous regions of South and Southeast Asia became directly connected through the maritime Silk Road, creating new trading centers and replacing older trade networks with more efficient routes. Ports that had been sleepy fishing villages became bustling cosmopolitan centers. New cities rose to prominence, and old ones faded into obscurity. The map of Asia itself was redrawn by the flow of commerce and culture. And here is a final, peaceful thought as we drift deeper into this segment: the dangers of the Silk Road, the bandits, the deserts, the diseases, and the storms, were not deterrents but merely the price of connection. For over 1,500 years, merchants paid this price willingly, again and again, because the alternative, isolation and stagnation, was far worse. They chose to brave the unknown, to face the perils, to build bridges between worlds. And in doing so, they created one of history's greatest achievements, a network of peace and commerce that spanned continents and centuries. Rest now, traveler. Let the gentle rocking of the dhows and the soft whisper of the desert wind carry you deeper into sleep. Tomorrow, we will explore the great cities and the people who made the Silk Road legendary. Welcome back, dear friend. We have traveled through deserts and across seas, and now we arrive at the great cities that made the Silk Road legendary. Let your mind settle into these places of wonder, where merchants, scholars, and adventurers gathered to exchange not just goods, but dreams and stories. The Silk Road was not merely a path, it was a constellation of magnificent cities that served as beacons of civilization and commerce. Samarkand, located in present-day Uzbekistan, was one of the most important crossroads of the Silk Road, a city where East met West in a harmonious blend of cultures and commerce. Imagine stepping into Samarkand's Great Bazaar, where the air shimmers with heat and possibility. The city's blue-tiled mosques caught the sunlight, creating a landscape that seemed almost dreamlike. Samarkand was not just a place to trade goods, it was a place where souls seemed to touch across the vast distances of the world. Nearby, another jewel awaited the weary traveler. Bokhara, also in Uzbekistan, served as another crucial hub of the Silk Road, known for its magnificent architecture, its libraries, and its role as a center of learning and spiritual reflection. While Samarkand was the crossroads, Bokhara was the sanctuary. Here, scholars debated philosophy in quiet courtyards. Here, books were copied by hand, preserving knowledge for future generations. The city's caravanserais were among the finest on the entire Silk Road, offering comfort and hospitality to all who arrived at its gates. But these were not the only great cities. Kashgar, located in western China, was another major trading hub where merchants from China, Central Asia, India, and the Middle East converged, making it one of the most cosmopolitan cities of the ancient world. Kashgar was a city of constant motion, of languages swirling together like wine through a canyon. Here, a Chinese merchant might haggle with an Indian trader while a Persian scholar listened nearby. The city's bazaars were legendary, filled with every conceivable treasure, silks and spices, precious stones and exotic animals, books and maps and artifacts from across the known world. These great cities did not emerge by accident. Their prominence was directly tied to the power and vision of the dynasties that ruled China. The Han Dynasty, which formally established the Silk Road in 130 BCE, laid the foundation for centuries of trade by sending diplomatic missions and establishing political relationships with Western regions. Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty was a visionary ruler who understood that connection was as valuable as conquest. He sent Zhang Qian westward not as a conqueror, but as an ambassador, seeking to build alliances and open trade. But it was another dynasty that would bring the Silk Road to its golden age. The Tang Dynasty, which ruled from 618 to 907 CE, presided over the Silk Road's most prosperous period, establishing what historians call the Second Pax Sinica, an era of unprecedented peace and trade. During the Tang dynasty, the Silk Road was safer, more organized, and more profitable than ever before. Merchants traveled with greater confidence. Cities grew larger and more prosperous. The exchange of goods and ideas reached its peak. It was a time of extraordinary flourishing, when the world seemed smaller and more connected than it had ever been. The people who walked these routes were remarkable individuals, driven by courage, curiosity, and the desire to see what lay beyond the horizon. Zhang Qian, the pioneering diplomat who opened the Silk Road in 138 BCE, spent years in captivity and faced countless hardships, yet he persevered in his mission to establish trade connections between China and the West. His story is one of quiet heroism, not the heroism of conquest, but of persistence and vision. He endured suffering not for glory, but for the simple belief that connection was possible. Other great travelers followed in his footsteps. Xuanzang, a Buddhist monk who traveled the Silk Road in the 7th century CE, journeyed for 16 years to India and back, bringing Buddhist texts and teachings to China, and becoming one of the most revered figures in East Asian history. Xuanzang's journey was not for profit, but for spiritual enlightenment. He crossed deserts, climbed mountains, and faced bandits, all in pursuit of wisdom. His travels transformed Buddhism in China and influenced the spiritual life of millions. And centuries later, another legendary traveler would follow. Marco Polo, a Venetian merchant, traveled along the Silk Road between 1271 and 1295, spending years at the court of Kublai Khan and bringing back accounts of the East that fascinated and inspired Europe for centuries to come. Marco Polo was a bridge between worlds, a man who lived in both East and West, and whose writings became a window through which Europeans could glimpse the wonders of Asia. His journey was not merely a commercial venture, it was a journey of discovery that would reshape European understanding of the world. These travelers, and countless others like them, were the true architects of the Silk Road. They were not content to remain in their homelands. They were driven by a deep human need to explore, to understand, and to connect. The Silk Road was ultimately sustained not by governments or merchants alone, but by the courage and determination of individual travelers who chose to venture into the unknown, carrying with them the hopes and dreams of their people. Each journey added to the network, each story shared strength in the bonds between distant lands. Rest now, traveler. Let the echoes of these great cities fade into the distance as sleep calls you deeper. In your dreams, you may walk the streets of Samarkand, or sit in the libraries of Bokhara, or stand in the bazaars of Kashgar. The Silk Road lives on in the imagination, a testament to human connection and Kura. Welcome back, weary soul. We have journeyed through deserts and cities, and now we arrive at the most profound legacy of the Silk Road, the exchange of art, faith, and knowledge that transformed civilizations. Let your mind drift into these realms of beauty and wisdom. The Silk Road was not merely a conduit for material goods. It was a channel through which the deepest expressions of human creativity and spirituality flowed. The Silk Road facilitated an unprecedented exchange of religious, philosophical, and scientific thought that fundamentally shaped the development of multiple civilizations. This exchange was not always peaceful and not always welcomed, but it was relentless and transformative. One of the most beautiful manifestations of this cultural exchange was in the realm of art. In the region of Gandhara, located in what is now Pakistan and Afghanistan, a remarkable artistic tradition emerged. Gandhara art, which developed between 100 BCE and 700 CE, blended Greek and Buddhist influences, creating a unique style that showed the Buddha in fully human form for the first time in Buddhist art history. Before Gandhara, the Buddha was often represented symbolically, through a footprint, a wheel, or an empty throne. But in Gandhara, artists, influenced by the Greco-Roman traditions brought along the Silk Road, depicted the Buddha as a compassionate human being, dressed in robes that resembled Greek garments, with a face that expressed both wisdom and gentleness. This artistic innovation spread eastward along the Silk Road, influencing Buddhist art throughout Asia for centuries to come. The sculptures of Gandhara were not merely beautiful, they were revolutionary. Gandharan sculptors created devotional Buddhist statues that grew dramatically in size and sophistication, particularly from the late 4th to early 5th centuries CE, reflecting the increasing importance of Buddhism in the region. These towering figures, carved from stone with remarkable skill, became pilgrimage sites and objects of veneration. They represented a moment when two great civilizations, the Greek and the Indian, met and created something entirely new. The Buddha, depicted with curled hair in the Greek style, gazed out from these sculptures with an expression of serene compassion that spoke to people across cultures and centuries. Beyond the visual arts, the Silk Road became a pathway for the exchange of profound knowledge. Mathematics, chemistry, and alchemy traveled along the Silk Road trade routes, and from these sciences developed the technology for making medicines that would save countless lives. Imagine a scholar in Baghdad learning the mathematical principles of a Chinese astronomer, or an Indian physician sharing the secrets of herbal remedies with a Persian healer. The accumulation of knowledge from different traditions created a synergy that accelerated human progress. The exchange of medical knowledge was particularly transformative. The Silk Road greatly contributed to the development of medical sciences, as knowledge from all over the world was exchanged, translated into Arabic, and then synthesized into new understandings of health and healing. A Chinese physician's knowledge of acupuncture, an Indian doctor's understanding of Ayurveda, an Arab scholar's study of anatomy, all of these traditions met and influenced one another. The result was a more comprehensive and nuanced understanding of the human body and the treatment of disease. The stars themselves became a subject of exchange. Astronomers and mathematicians along the Silk Road, such as Al-Khwarizmi, made fundamental advances in mathematics and astronomy, systematizing algebra, introducing decimal system mathematics, and creating the foundations for modern scientific thought. These scholars worked in cities like Baghdad, where the House of Wisdom became a beacon of learning. They drew upon knowledge from China, India, Persia, and Greece, synthesizing it into new forms. The very word algorithm comes from Al-Khwarizmi's name, a testament to how his work, influenced by the Silk Road exchange, shaped the world. But perhaps the most profound exchanges along the Silk Road were spiritual and religious. Multiple faiths traveled the Silk Road, including Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, and later, Islam, each finding new homes and transforming the spiritual landscape of the regions they reached. Buddhism, as we have discussed, traveled from India to China and beyond. But Christianity also found its way eastward, reaching communities in Central Asia and even China. Judaism established communities in cities along the route. Islam, emerging in the 7th century, would eventually become the dominant faith in many regions touched by the Silk Road. The Silk Road became a meeting point of faiths, a place where different spiritual traditions encountered one another with varying degrees of tolerance and conflict. The Silk Road was a crossroads of faiths where Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism coexisted, sometimes peacefully and sometimes in tension, but always influencing one another. In cities like Samarkand and Kashgar, it was not uncommon to find a Buddhist monastery, a Christian church, a Muslim mosque, and a Jewish synagogue all within the same city walls. People of different faiths lived as neighbors, traded as partners, and sometimes married and had children together. The Silk Road was, in many ways, the world's first truly multicultural space. And here is a final, peaceful thought as we conclude this segment. The greatest treasure that traveled the Silk Road was not silk or spices, but the human capacity to learn from one another, to be transformed by encounter with the different, and to create beauty and knowledge through the synthesis of diverse traditions. Every merchant who carried goods also carried stories. Every scholar who traveled also carried ideas. Every pilgrim who journeyed also carried faith. And in carrying these things, they changed not just themselves, but the entire world. Rest now, traveler. Let the gentle hum of prayers in 100 different languages carry you into deeper sleep. The Silk Road continues to live in our hearts and minds, a reminder that connection and exchange are the foundations of human progress and beauty. Welcome back, dear traveler. We have journeyed through centuries of trade and culture, and now we approach a turning point in the story of the Silk Road. Let your mind settle into this chapter, where empires rose to their greatest heights before beginning their slow descent into history. There came a time when the Silk Road reached a new pinnacle of safety and prosperity. The Mongol Empire, which conquered vast territories from China to Europe in the 13th century, created what is known as the Pax Mongolica, a period of relative peace and stability that made the Silk Road safer and more profitable than ever before. The Mongols, often remembered as fierce warriors, were also pragmatic rulers who understood the value of trade. They established order across their vast dominion, suppressing bandits and creating a network of way stations and safe routes. For merchants, this was a golden age. Under the protection of the Pax Mongolica, the Silk Road flourished in ways it had never known. Protected under the Pax Mongolica, the Silk Road routes functioned as efficient lines of communication as well as trade, allowing goods, ideas, and information to flow with unprecedented speed and security. A merchant could now travel from China to Europe with far less fear of bandits or political instability. Information traveled faster than ever before. News of distant markets reached traders quickly, allowing them to make better decisions about what goods to buy and sell. The Silk Road became not just a trade route, but a network of communication that connected the known world. The Mongol rulers were not content with land routes alone. The maritime Silk Road, which had developed alongside the overland routes, was further expanded and protected under Mongol rule, creating a vast network of sea trade that complemented the land routes. Chinese ships, built with advanced technology, sailed across the Indian Ocean, carrying goods and establishing trading posts. The Mongols understood that control of both land and sea routes meant control of global commerce. This period of Mongol dominance saw an explosion of cultural and commercial exchange. During the Pax Mongolica, trade volumes increased dramatically, and the goods that were carried along the trading routes shaped fashions in food and clothing all over Asia and Europe, creating a more interconnected world than had ever existed before. Spices from India became common in European kitchens. Chinese porcelain graced the tables of European nobility. European furs and metals found their way to Asian markets. The world was becoming smaller, more connected, more unified through commerce. Yet all things must change. The Mongol Empire, vast as it was, could not endure forever. The decline of the overland Silk Road began in the 15th century as a result of the emergence of new maritime trade routes that offered safer and more economical alternatives to the dangerous overland routes. European explorers, seeking direct sea routes to Asia, began to sail around Africa. These new routes bypassed the Silk Road entirely, offering European merchants a way to trade directly with Asia without passing through the hands of Middle Eastern intermediaries. The advantage shifted from the Silk Road to the sea. The transformation was gradual but inexorable. The maritime Silk Route was disrupted by the colonial era in the 15th century, with European maritime trade routes essentially replacing the traditional Silk Road, as European powers sought to control global commerce. Portuguese ships rounded the Cape of Good Hope. Spanish explorers sailed westward across the Atlantic. The age of European maritime dominance was beginning, and the age of the Silk Road was drawing to a close. The overland routes, which had flourished for over 1,500 years, began to fade from prominence. The overland Silk Road is commonly considered to have entered its final decline in the 17th century, as maritime trade routes became increasingly dominant and the political stability that had supported the routes began to deteriorate. The Mongol Empire had fragmented. New empires rose, but they did not always support trade in the same way. The routes that had once been safe became dangerous again. Merchants began to prefer the sea routes, which, despite their perils, offered more direct access to markets and fewer intermediaries to pay. Yet the legacy of the Silk Road did not disappear with the decline of the routes themselves. The Silk Road had created an interconnected world where trade, culture, and knowledge flowed across continents, and this interconnectedness persisted even after the routes themselves faded from prominence. The ideas that had traveled the Silk Road remained embedded in the cultures that had received them. The technologies that had been exchanged continued to be used and refined. The religions that had spread along the routes continued to flourish. The Silk Road had changed the world permanently. And here is a final, gentle thought as we conclude this segment. The Silk Road reminds us that human connection and commerce, when pursued with wisdom and openness, can create beauty, knowledge, and prosperity that endures far beyond the routes themselves. The Silk Road lasted for over 1,500 years not because it was perfect, but because it served a fundamental human need, the need to connect, to trade, to learn, and to grow. Even now, centuries after the routes have faded, the Silk Road continues to inspire us, reminding us that the world is larger than our own communities, and that connection across difference is not just possible but essential. Rest now, traveler. Let the echoes of the Mongol Empire fade into silence as sleep claims you. The Silk Road lives on in history, in culture, and in the hearts of all who understand that connection is the foundation of civilization. Welcome back, thoughtful traveler. We have journeyed through the beauty and wonder of the Silk Road, but now we must pause to acknowledge a more difficult truth. Every great human achievement carries with it unintended consequences and shadows. Let us explore these darker aspects with honesty and compassion, understanding that history is complex and multifaceted. The Silk Road, for all its beauty and wonder, was also a pathway for suffering. The Silk Road allowed, possibly for the first time, the sustained transmission of diseases endemic to Central Asia to move outward along the routes, spreading pathogens that would devastate distant populations. Merchants and travelers, moving along the routes, carried not just goods and ideas but also invisible passengers, bacteria, viruses, and parasites that thrived in the close quarters of caravans and ships. A disease that was endemic to one region, something that local populations had learned to live with, could become catastrophic when introduced to populations with no immunity. The most devastating example of this disease transmission came in the 14th century. The Black Death, a plague caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, spread along the Silk Road in the 14th century CE, traveling from Central Asia to Europe and decimating populations across multiple continents. The plague moved along the same routes that merchants traveled, carried by infected rats and fleas that infested ships and caravans. A disease that originated in the steppes of Central Asia spread to the Mediterranean, to Europe, and beyond. Millions died. Entire cities were emptied. The social fabric of European civilization was torn apart. The Silk Road, which had brought so much wealth and knowledge, also brought death on an unimaginable scale. The mechanisms of plague transmission were subtle and relentless. The plague bacterium spread through contact with infected fleas and rats, which traveled aboard merchant ships and in the supplies of caravans, making it nearly impossible for traders to prevent the spread of the disease. A merchant in Samarkand might have no idea that the rats in his warehouse carried plague. A ship captain sailing from a Central Asian port might not know that fleas infested his cargo. Yet the disease spread, following the same routes as the trade goods, reaching new populations and new continents. The evidence of this tragic exchange is written in the historical record. Scientists have found evidence that a virulent strain of the Black Death bacterium lurked in Central Asia for centuries, working its way along the Silk Road routes to reach Europe and other distant regions, causing pandemics that killed millions. The plague did not arrive suddenly. It had been present in Central Asia for a long time, but the expansion of trade routes and the increased movement of people and goods accelerated its spread to populations that had never encountered it before. Beyond disease, the Silk Road also facilitated another form of human suffering that we must acknowledge with sorrow. Slavery and human trafficking were integral to the medieval Silk Road, with enslaved people being a common trade good, with millions of people forcibly transported along the routes and sold in markets across Eurasia. While we often think of the Silk Road as a place of peaceful exchange, the reality is that it was also a pathway for human exploitation. Raiding armies would capture people and sell them to traders. Desperate families would sell their children into slavery. These enslaved people were transported along the same routes as silk and spices, treated as commodities rather than human beings. The scale of this human trafficking was staggering. Slavery was prevalent throughout the medieval Silk Road, with enslaved people being numerous and easy to acquire in the vibrant markets of Afro-Eurasian trading centers, though they were also hugely expensive, making slavery a significant part of the Silk Road economy. In cities like Samarkand and Kashgar, slave markets operated openly. People from different regions, Africans, Europeans, Asians, were bought and sold. Some were used as domestic servants, others as laborers, and still others in ways too terrible to contemplate. The Silk Road, which connected the world, also connected the world's suffering. The environmental costs of the Silk Road, too, were significant, though often overlooked. The construction and maintenance of the Silk Road routes, along with increased human activity in fragile desert and mountain ecosystems, contributed to desertification and environmental degradation in Central Asia and beyond. The routes themselves required constant maintenance. Caravanserais required wood for construction and fuel. The increased movement of people and animals through fragile ecosystems caused soil erosion and vegetation loss. In some regions, the accessibility created by the Silk Road led to overexploitation of natural resources. The desertification that occurred in some regions along the Silk Road was partly driven by the increased human activity that the routes facilitated. The desertification of certain areas along the Silk Road may have been closely associated with the accessibility created by the trade routes, which increased human activity and resource extraction in fragile ecosystems. What had been marginally habitable land became increasingly uninhabitable as resources were depleted. The very routes that brought prosperity to some regions may have contributed to the decline of others. And here is a final, sobering thought as we conclude this segment. The Silk Road teaches us that human connection, while essential and beautiful, always carries risks and consequences that we cannot fully predict or control. The same routes that brought silk and spices also brought plague. The same trade that created wealth also created suffering. The same exchange of ideas that enlightened minds also facilitated the spread of exploitation. History is not a simple story of progress and connection, it is a complex tapestry of light and shadow, of beauty and suffering intertwined. Yet this acknowledgement does not diminish the Silk Road's importance. Rather, it deepens our understanding of it. The Silk Road shows us that human progress is never simple, never free from cost, and never without consequence. But it also shows us that despite these costs, the human drive to connect, to learn, and to grow is so powerful that we continue to build bridges across distance and difference. Understanding both the light and the shadow of the Silk Road makes us wiser travelers in our own time. Rest now, traveler. Let these difficult truths settle gently in your mind as sleep approaches. Tomorrow, we will emerge from the shadows and remember the enduring legacy of the Silk Road. Welcome back, curious traveler. We have journeyed through the ages of the Silk Road, and now we turn our attention to how this ancient network has been rediscovered and remembered. Let your mind settle into the wonder of archaeology, where the past speaks to us through the artifacts and manuscripts that have survived the centuries. The Silk Road may have faded from prominence, but it did not disappear from the earth. Archaeological finds from Silk Road sites, including coins, ceramics, beads, and textiles, provide evidence of cultural interactions, migration patterns, and the settlement of diverse ethnic groups along the routes. These objects, buried in the sand for centuries, tell stories of the people who lived along the routes. A coin from Persia found in China speaks of trade. A piece of pottery bearing both Chinese and Greek designs speaks of cultural exchange. A bead from India found in Central Asia speaks of the vast distances that goods traveled. One of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries came in the form of manuscripts. In 1900, a Taoist monk discovered the sealed library cave, Cave 17, at Dunhuang, containing over 5,000 manuscripts and silk scrolls dating from the 4th to 11th centuries, providing an extraordinary window into Silk Road life and culture. Imagine the moment of discovery, a hidden chamber, sealed for centuries, suddenly opened to reveal thousands of documents. These manuscripts included Buddhist texts, government records, personal letters, and business documents. They were written in Chinese, Tibetan, Sanskrit, and other languages, reflecting the multilingual, multicultural nature of the Silk Road. The Dunhuang manuscripts are treasures of incalculable value. The library cave at Dunhuang contained texts from the 4th to 11th centuries that depicted the diversity and beauty of the Silk Road in western China, including religious texts, literary works, and administrative documents that illuminate daily life along the routes. These documents tell us how merchants conducted business, how monks studied Buddhism, how families lived their lives. A receipt for the purchase of silk. A letter from a merchant to his family. A Buddhist sutra copied by hand. Each document is a voice from the past, speaking across the centuries. The exploration of Silk Road archaeology has been ongoing for over a century. Early explorers and archaeologists, including Sir Aurel Stein, conducted expeditions along the Silk Road in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, uncovering thousands of artifacts that are now housed in museums around the world. Stein's expeditions were particularly fruitful, bringing back small stucco reliefs, pieces of ceramics and glass, textiles, and manuscripts that provided the first systematic understanding of Silk Road material culture. These collections, now in institutions like the British Museum, continue to be studied and valued by scholars. Modern archaeology continues to reveal new secrets of the Silk Road. Recent archaeological excavations in Uzbekistan and other Central Asian locations have uncovered rare Silk Road artifacts, including silk fabrics, leather goods, and other items that provide new insights into trade practices and daily life along the routes. Using advanced technology like LiDAR-equipped drones, archaeologists are mapping ancient sites with unprecedented precision, revealing the layout and scale of cities that had been lost to time. Each new discovery adds to our understanding of this remarkable network. The physical remains of Silk Road cities continue to fascinate researchers. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of remarkable Silk Road cities and trading centers, including the discovery of what may be the lost iron-making city of Marsmanda, which could rewrite the history of the famed trade route and reveal previously unknown aspects of Silk Road commerce. These cities, built in remote and harsh environments, were engineering marvels in their own right. The fact that they survived at all is remarkable. The fact that they are now being systematically excavated and studied offers hope that more secrets of the Silk Road will be revealed. The legacy of the Silk Road extends into the modern world in unexpected ways. China's Belt and Road Initiative, sometimes referred to as the New Silk Road, is a contemporary infrastructure project that aims to invest in over 150 countries through overland economic corridors and maritime routes, explicitly drawing inspiration from the ancient Silk Road. This modern project seeks to recreate the connectivity and prosperity that the ancient Silk Road once provided. It is a testament to the enduring power of the Silk Road as a symbol of connection and commerce. The Belt and Road Initiative explicitly invokes the spirit of the ancient Silk Road. The Belt and Road Initiative is described as a creative development that takes on and carries forward the spirit of the ancient Silk routes, representing a modern attempt to recreate the peace, cooperation, openness, and inclusiveness that characterized the ancient network. Whether this modern initiative will succeed in capturing the spirit of the ancient Silk Road remains to be seen. But the fact that it is being attempted shows how deeply the Silk Road has embedded itself in human consciousness as a symbol of what is possible when people choose to connect rather than divide. And here's a final, hopeful thought as we conclude this segment. The Silk Road reminds us that human achievements, even when they fade from prominence, leave traces that can be rediscovered and relearned by future generations, offering wisdom and inspiration for building new connections in our own time. The manuscripts in the library cave at Dunhuang have survived for over 1,000 years, waiting to be discovered. The artifacts buried in the sand have waited patiently for archaeologists to uncover them. And the memory of the Silk Road itself has endured, inspiring new generations to seek connection and understanding across the vast distances that separate us. Rest now, traveler. Let the whispers of ancient scholars and merchants fade into the peaceful silence of sleep. The Silk Road lives on, not just in history books and museum displays, but in the human heart's eternal desire to reach across distance and connect with the world beyond our own horizons. Welcome back, dear traveler. We have journeyed through the grand narratives of the Silk Road, the emperors and merchants, the cities and routes. But now let us pause and listen to the quieter voices, the the stories of those whose contributions were essential but often overlooked. Let us speak of the women and the daily lives of ordinary people who made the Silk Road possible. The history of the Silk Road is often told as a story of great men, emperors, generals, famous merchants, and renowned scholars. But this is an incomplete picture. Women were integral to every aspect of the Silk Road, serving as primary producers of crucial items sold and transported along the routes, as merchants themselves, and as facilitators of cultural exchange and dialogue. In the homes and workshops of cities along the Silk Road, women spun thread, wove cloth, and created the very silk that gave the route its name. Without their labor, the Silk Road would not have existed. The role of women as merchants and traders, while less celebrated than that of their male counterparts, was nonetheless significant. Women merchants along the Silk Road engaged in trade, managed family businesses, and sometimes traveled the routes themselves, though their contributions are often underrepresented in historical records. Some women inherited trading businesses from their fathers or husbands and continued to operate them with skill and acumen. Others formed partnerships with family members. A few traveled as merchants in their own right, navigating the same dangers and opportunities as their male counterparts. Their stories, though often hidden in the margins of history, deserve to be remembered. The daily life of people along the Silk Road was shaped by the constant flow of trade and the encounter with different cultures. Merchants and residents of Silk Road cities had to learn local languages, adapt to local customs and etiquette, and incorporate local food and clothing traditions while maintaining their own cultural practices. Imagine a Chinese merchant living in Samarkand, learning to speak Persian, adopting local dress for business transactions, yet maintaining his own religious practices and family traditions. This constant negotiation between cultures was the reality of Silk Road life. It required flexibility, openness, and a willingness to change while remaining rooted in one's own identity. The food of the Silk Road was a reflection of this cultural exchange. Spices, fruits, and culinary traditions traveled along the Silk Road, transforming the diets and food cultures of regions far from their origins, with merchants and residents adopting new foods and cooking methods from the cultures they encountered. A Chinese cook in a Silk Road city might learn to use Indian spices in new ways. A Persian merchant might discover the pleasures of Chinese tea. These culinary exchanges were not merely about taste, they were about the deepening of connections between peoples. Sharing a meal became a way of building trust and understanding. The clothing and adornment of Silk Road peoples reflected the cultural synthesis that occurred along the routes. Silk became a luxury item that people wore on their clothing and sought increasingly, with the demand for silk driving significant trade and leading to shortages in precious metals as people spent increasing amounts of gold and silver to purchase this coveted fabric. Silk was not merely a practical material, it was a status symbol, a luxury that demonstrated wealth and sophistication. The desire for silk drove merchants to undertake dangerous journeys. It motivated rulers to establish trade relationships. It shaped economies and politics across multiple continents. But silk had uses beyond mere clothing and adornment. In Buddhist cultures, silk was made into ritual banners, used as a canvas for paintings, and incorporated into religious ceremonies, giving the material spiritual as well as economic significance. A piece of silk could be a sacred object, a work of art, or a luxury garment. This multiplicity of uses and meanings made silk one of the most versatile and valued commodities on the Silk Road. It was simultaneously practical and spiritual, economic and cultural. The merchants themselves, while often celebrated, were in many ways ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Merchants along the Silk Road played an evolving role as facilitators not just of long-distance trade but also of intercultural exchange and dialogue, serving as bridges between distant communities and helping to create understanding across vast distances. A merchant was not merely a person seeking profit, he or she was a cultural ambassador, a translator, a bridge builder. Through their daily interactions, merchants created the conditions for understanding and connection. They were, in many ways, the true architects of the Silk Road's cultural legacy. Many merchants were based in a single location and conducted trade through networks of family and clan relatives. most merchants along the Silk Road were based in a single location and traded with family or clan relatives at the nearest leg of the trade route in either direction, creating family-based trading networks that span continents and generations. These family networks were the backbone of Silk Road commerce. A merchant in Chang'an might have cousins in Samarkand and relatives in Baghdad, all working together to move goods along the routes. These networks were built on trust, on family obligation, and on the understanding that long-term relationships were more valuable than short-term profit. And here is a final, intimate thought as we conclude this segment: the Silk Road was ultimately built not by great empires or famous merchants alone, but by countless ordinary people, women and men, merchants and laborers, scholars and priests, who chose to engage with the different, to learn new languages, to taste new foods, and to build relationships across the vast distances that separated them. Each person who traveled the routes, each person who learned a new language, each person who shared a meal with a stranger from a distant land, was contributing to something larger than themselves. They were building a world where connection was possible, where understanding could grow, and where the human capacity for empathy and exchange could flourish. Rest now, traveler. Let the gentle sounds of looms and voices fade into the peaceful silence of sleep. The Silk Road lives on in the everyday acts of connection and exchange that continue to bind humanity together. In your dreams, you may walk the streets of ancient cities, share a meal with a merchant from a distant land, or feel the soft touch of silk against your skin. The Silk Road is not just history, it is a reminder of what we are capable of when we choose to reach across distance and connect with one another. Welcome, dear traveler, to the final chapter of our journey. We have walked the length of the Silk Road, through its golden ages and its decline, through its achievements and its shadows. Now, as sleep draws near, let us reflect on what this ancient network teaches us about ourselves and our world. The Silk Road was, in many ways, the world's first global network. The Silk Road is often described as history's first World Wide Web, a network that connected distant peoples and allowed the exchange of goods, ideas, and knowledge across continents in ways that had never been possible before. Long before the internet, long before modern transportation, the Silk Road created a web of connection that spanned the known world. It showed that human beings, despite the vast distances that separated them, could find ways to communicate, to trade, and to learn from one another. This ancient network created the foundation for the world we inhabit today. The Silk Road established the foundation for the contemporary globalized society in which we currently reside, demonstrating that open channels of communication and trade, despite geographical and cultural barriers, can benefit all societies involved. The world we live in, with its global supply chains, its international communications, its multicultural cities, is, in many ways, a continuation of what the Silk Road began. The Silk Road showed us that connection is not just possible but essential for human flourishing. The lesson of the Silk Road is one that remains profoundly relevant in our modern world. The Silk Road serves as a model for how societies can benefit from open channels of communication and trade, showing that it is better to connect to the peoples and cultures around us and to participate in the commerce of nations than to withdraw from such interchange. In a world that sometimes seems divided by walls and suspicion, the Silk Road reminds us of what is possible when people choose openness over isolation, connection over division. It reminds us that our differences are not obstacles to overcome but opportunities for enrichment. The cultural heritage of the Silk Road has been recognized and protected by the international community. UNESCO has identified hundreds of sites and monuments of both cultural and historic value along the Silk Roads, designating them as World Heritage Sites to preserve and promote the cultural heritage of the Silk Road for future generations. These sites, from the Buddhist caves of Dunhuang to the mosques of Samarkand, from the caravanserais of Central Asia to the ports of the maritime Silk Road, are living monuments to the achievements of the Silk Road. They stand as reminders of what human beings can accomplish when they work together. The protection and preservation of Silk Road heritage is an ongoing effort. UNESCO and other international organizations work to preserve and promote the cultural heritage of the Silk Roads, enhancing the value of both tangible heritage such as monuments and intangible heritage such as traditions, languages, and cultural practices. This work is not merely about preserving the past, it is about honoring the people who created the Silk Road and ensuring that future generations can learn from their example. Every manuscript preserved, every monument restored, every tradition documented is an act of respect for those who came before us. The Silk Road reminds us of a fundamental truth about human nature. The Silk Road demonstrates that human beings are naturally drawn to connection, that we have an innate desire to reach beyond our own communities, to learn from others, and to build relationships across the distances that separate us. This desire is not new, it has been part of human nature for thousands of years. The Silk Road was simply one expression of this eternal human longing to connect. And this longing continues today, in new forms and through new channels. The knowledge and wisdom that traveled the Silk Road transformed civilizations. Knowledge, beliefs, and traditions passed between various countries along the Silk Road, leading to a wonderful mixture of cultures and ideas that enriched all the civilizations involved in the network. A mathematical concept from the Islamic world could reach China and be refined there, then travel back to the West in a new form. A religious idea from India could transform the spiritual landscape of East Asia. A technological innovation from China could revolutionize production in the West. The Silk Road was a laboratory of human creativity and innovation, where ideas could be tested, refined, and improved through contact with different perspectives. The Silk Road bridged not just geography but also the gap between different ways of understanding the world. The Silk Road played a crucial role in bridging the gap between the East and the West, creating understanding and connection between civilizations that might otherwise have remained isolated and suspicious of one another. Before the Silk Road, the East and West were largely unknown to each other. The Silk Road changed that. It created familiarity, understanding, and respect. It showed that people from different cultures, with different beliefs and different ways of life, could find common ground and work together for mutual benefit. And here is the final, most important lesson that the Silk Road teaches us as we drift towards sleep. The Silk Road endures not as a physical network of routes, but as a symbol of what humanity is capable of achieving when we choose connection over isolation, understanding over suspicion, and cooperation over conflict. The Silk Road has been gone for centuries, yet it continues to inspire us. It continues to teach us. It continues to remind us of our capacity for greatness. In every act of connection we make, in every person from a different culture we learn from, in every bridge we build across difference, we are continuing the work of the Silk Road. Rest now, dear traveler. Your journey along the Silk Road is complete. You have walked through deserts and mountains, visited great cities, encountered remarkable people, and learned the wisdom that this ancient network has to teach. As sleep claims you, carry with you the memory of the Silk Road, not as a distant historical curiosity, but as a living reminder of what we are capable of when we reach across distance and connect with one another. The Silk Road lives on in the human heart, in our capacity for empathy, in our desire to learn, and in our ability to build bridges across the vast distances that separate us. May your sleep be peaceful, may your dreams be filled with the wonders of the Silk Road, and may you awake refreshed and inspired to build connections in your own life. The Silk Road's greatest legacy is not the goods that traveled its routes, but the understanding that we are all connected, all part of a vast human family that spans continents and centuries. Sleep well, traveler. The Silk Road will be waiting for you when you return. Welcome back, beloved traveler. We have journeyed far along the Silk Road, through its golden ages and its decline, through its achievements and its shadows. Now, as we approach the final chapters of our journey, let us explore the deeper, more intimate stories, the lesser-known truths that reveal the human heart of this ancient network. The Silk Road was not simply a path for merchants and goods. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of human connection and cultural negotiation. The diverse polities and value systems in existence along the Silk Road required merchants to navigate a wider repertoire of cultural negotiations, adapting their language, customs, and business practices to succeed in different regions. Imagine a merchant from Samarkand arriving in a Chinese city, not just learning the language but also understanding the philosophical worldview, the religious practices, and the social hierarchies that govern that place. Success on the Silk Road required not just commercial acumen but profound cultural intelligence and flexibility. One group of people played a particularly crucial role in this cultural mediation, though their stories are often overlooked. The Sogdians, an ancient Silk Road people from Central Asia, became the master merchants and cultural intermediaries of the Silk Road, whose influence on world art, culture, and trade has only in recent decades begun to be fully recognized and appreciated. The Sogdians were not conquerors or emperors, but they were perhaps the most influential people on the Silk Road. They established trading posts, learned multiple languages, and became the bridges between East and West. Their cultural legacy is woven into the very fabric of the Silk Road. The Sogdians understood something fundamental about the Silk Road that made them invaluable. Sogdian merchants established networks of trading communities across the Silk Road, creating family-based trading dynasties that span continents and maintain connections across generations, ensuring the continuity and reliability of trade. These were not solitary adventurers but members of extended family networks that stretched from China to the Mediterranean. A Sogdian merchant in China might have cousins in Samarkand, relatives in Baghdad, and trading partners in Constantinople. This network of kinship and trust was the invisible infrastructure that made the Silk Road function. The goods that moved along the Silk Road were often more precious and more carefully guarded than we might imagine. Silkworm eggs from China were so valuable and so carefully guarded that they were sometimes concealed in walking sticks and smuggled to other regions, as China sought to maintain its monopoly on silk production. The Chinese understood that silk was not just a commodity, it was a source of power, wealth, and influence. The secret of sericulture, the art of raising silkworms and producing silk, was one of the most closely guarded secrets in the ancient world. Smuggling silkworm eggs was a capital offense in China, yet the temptation was so great that merchants risked their lives to steal this precious secret. The movement of goods along the Silk Road was not one-directional. As silk came westward from China, newly invented blown glass, asbestos, amber, and red coral moved eastward, creating a true exchange where both directions of trade brought valuable and transformative goods. The West did not simply receive, it also gave. Roman glass, with its sophisticated techniques of production, traveled eastward and transformed Chinese art. Amber from the Baltic found its way to China, where it was treasured for its beauty and its supposed medicinal properties. This bidirectional flow of goods created a more balanced and mutually beneficial trade than simple extraction would have allowed. The cultural impact of the Silk Road extended far beyond the goods themselves. During the Tang dynasty of China, sculptures of camels from the caravans that frequently traded in China became popular art forms, reflecting the fascination with the exotic animals and the foreign traders who brought them. These ceramic camels, now displayed in museums around the world, are not merely decorative objects, they are testimony to the profound cultural impact of the Silk Road on Chinese society. The camel, an animal unknown in China before the Silk Road, became a symbol of the exotic, the foreign, and the cosmopolitan. The infrastructure of the Silk Road was far more complex and sophisticated than a simple network of routes. The Silk Road was not a single highway but a diffuse web, a shifting skein of thousands of camel trails, mountain pass bottlenecks, turreted caravanserais, river bazaars, and seaports, constantly adapting to political changes, natural disasters, and economic shifts. The routes were not fixed, they changed based on which kingdoms were at war, which mountain passes were safe, which rivers were navigable. Merchants had to constantly update their knowledge of the best routes, the safest paths, and the most profitable connections. This flexibility and adaptability was one of the great strengths of the Silk Road. The Silk Road's influence on world history extended far beyond commerce. The Silk Road developed to become a driving force in the formation of diverse societies across Eurasia and far beyond, shaping the development of cities, religions, technologies, and cultural practices across multiple continents and centuries. The Silk Road was not simply a trade route, it was a transformative force that shaped the course of human history. Without the Silk Road, the world would be fundamentally different. The religions we practice, the technologies we use, the foods we eat, the art we create, all of these bear the imprint of the Silk Road. The people who lived along the Silk Road developed unique cultural identities that blended multiple traditions. Cities along the Silk Road became cosmopolitan centers where local traditions blended with foreign influences, creating new art forms, new cuisines, new languages, and new ways of thinking that were neither purely Eastern nor purely Western. A person living in Kashgar might speak Chinese, Persian, Sanskrit, and Arabic. They might practice Buddhism, Islam, and Zoroastrianism simultaneously. They might eat Chinese noodles with Indian spices and Persian bread. This cultural hybridity was not confusion or loss of identity, it was a rich and vibrant synthesis that created something entirely new. The environmental adaptation required by the Silk Road was remarkable. Merchants traveling the Silk Road developed specialized knowledge of desert navigation, mountain climbing, river crossing, and weather prediction, creating a body of practical wisdom that was passed down through generations and refined through centuries of experience. These were not casual travelers, they were experts in survival, in navigation, and in understanding the natural world. They knew which stars to follow, which water sources were reliable, which seasons were safest for travel. This knowledge was as valuable as any commodity they carried. The Silk Road created new forms of communication and information exchange. Information traveled along the Silk Road almost as quickly as goods, with merchants serving as carriers of news, rumors, and intelligence that shaped political decisions and military strategies across multiple empires. A merchant arriving in a city with news of a distant war, a distant harvest, or a distant discovery could influence the decisions of kings and emperors. The Silk Road was, in many ways, the ancient world's first information network. The role of women in Silk Road commerce, while often overlooked, was essential to its functioning. Women merchants, traders, and business owners operated along the Silk Road, managing caravanserais, trading goods, and sometimes traveling the routes themselves, though their contributions are often underrepresented in historical records and chronicles. Some women inherited trading businesses from their fathers or husbands and continued to operate them with skill and determination. Others formed partnerships with family members. A few traveled as merchants in their own right, navigating the same dangers and opportunities as their male counterparts. Their stories, though often hidden in the margins of history, deserve to be remembered and celebrated. The Silk Road's legacy in art and architecture is profound and visible even today. Architectural styles, artistic techniques, and decorative motifs traveled along the Silk Road, creating a synthesis of Eastern and Western aesthetics that influenced the development of art and architecture across multiple regions and centuries. A mosque in Central Asia might incorporate Chinese architectural elements. A Buddhist temple in China might display Persian artistic influences. A church in the Middle East might use Indian decorative techniques. This artistic synthesis created some of the most beautiful and innovative works of human creativity. The Silk Road facilitated the exchange of agricultural knowledge and practices. Crops, farming techniques, and agricultural innovations traveled along the Silk Road, transforming the agricultural practices and food cultures of regions far from their origins, with new crops and new methods spreading across continents and changing the diets and economies of millions. Wheat from the Middle East reached China. Rice cultivation techniques from China spread westward. New fruits, vegetables, and spices transformed the cuisines of distant lands. These agricultural exchanges had profound consequences for population growth, economic development, and social change. The decline of the Silk Road was not sudden but gradual, with multiple factors contributing to its slow fade from prominence. The rise of maritime trade routes, the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire, the development of new political boundaries, and the shift of economic power to coastal regions all contributed to the gradual decline of the Silk Road over several centuries. There was no single moment when the Silk Road ended, rather, it slowly faded as the world changed around it. New routes emerged, new technologies developed, and new powers rose to prominence. Yet the memory of the Silk Road persisted, inspiring future generations to seek connection across distance and difference. And here is a final, profound thought as we approach the end of our journey. The Silk Road teaches us that human beings are fundamentally driven to connect, to exchange, to learn from one another, and that this drive to connection is so powerful that it can overcome mountains, deserts, political divisions, and cultural differences. The Silk Road was not built by governments or empires alone, it was built by countless individuals who chose to reach across distance and connect with the different. Each merchant who traveled the routes, each scholar who shared knowledge, each artist who blended traditions, each person who chose openness over isolation, was contributing to something larger than themselves. Rest now, traveler. You have journeyed far along the Silk Road, through its golden ages and its decline, through its achievements and its shadows, through its grand narratives and its intimate human stories. The Silk Road has shown you what human beings are capable of achieving when we choose connection over division, understanding over suspicion, and cooperation over conflict. As sleep claims you, carry with you the memory of this ancient network, not as a distant historical curiosity, but as a living reminder of what we are capable of when we reach across distance and connect with one another. May your sleep be peaceful, may your dreams be filled with the wonders of the Silk Road, and may you awake refreshed and inspired to build connections in your own life. The Silk Road's greatest legacy is not the goods that traveled its routes, but the understanding that we are all connected, all part of a vast human family that spans continents and centuries. Sleep well, traveler. The Silk Road will be waiting for you when you return. Welcome back, dear traveler. We continue our journey deeper into the heart of the Silk Road, exploring the intricate mechanics of trade, the specific goods that moved along the routes, and the profound economic transformations that rippled across continents. Let your mind drift into these stories of commerce and connection. The Silk Road was not simply about moving goods from one place to another. It was a dynamic and complex system of exchange that transformed as it moved. The Silk Roads were dynamic and porous, goods were traded with local populations throughout the routes, and local products were constantly added into merchants' cargoes, creating an ever-evolving mixture of commodities. A merchant might begin his journey in China with Chinese silk, but by the time he reached Samarkand, his cargo would include Persian carpets, Central Asian horses, and Indian spices. The caravan was not a static entity, it was a living, breathing collection of goods that changed with every stop. One of the most important and enduring exchanges on the Silk Road was particularly fascinating in its specificity. The silk for horse trade was one of the most important and long-lasting exchanges on the Silk Road, with Chinese merchants and officials trading bolts of precious silk for the strong, swift horses of Central Asia that were essential for military power. This exchange was so fundamental to the Silk Road's existence that it shaped the political relationships between empires. China needed horses to defend its borders and to maintain its cavalry. Central Asia needed silk to demonstrate wealth and status. This mutual need created a trade relationship that endured for over 1,000 years. The goods that moved along the Silk Road were remarkably diverse, reflecting the varied needs and desires of different civilizations. Europeans wanted pearls and gems, spices, precious metals, medicines, ceramics, carpets, other fabrics, and lacquerware, while all kingdoms needed horses, weapons, and luxury goods to demonstrate power and status. The Silk Road was not a trade in necessities, it was primarily a trade in luxuries, in goods that demonstrated wealth, power, and cultural sophistication. A European noble wearing Chinese silk was displaying not just wealth but connection to the wider world. A Chinese emperor receiving Persian carpets was demonstrating his access to distant lands. The specific goods that traveled westward from Asia were carefully chosen to appeal to European tastes and needs. Europe imported rice, cotton, woolen fabrics, porcelains, and silk fabrics from Asia, while exporting glassware, skins, furs, bark for skin processing, cattle, and other goods that were valued in Eastern markets. This bidirectional flow shows that the Silk Road was not a one-way extraction but a genuine exchange where both sides had something valuable to offer. European furs were as precious in Central Asia as Chinese silk was in Europe. The trade was balanced by mutual desire and mutual benefit. Central Asia played a crucial role as both a source of goods and a hub of redistribution. Central Asia exported camels, which were highly appreciated in China, along with military equipment, gold and silver, semi-precious stones, and glass items, making the region a vital source of goods for the Silk Road trade. The camel, in particular, was not just a commodity but the essential infrastructure of the Silk Road. Without camels, the Silk Road would not have been possible. These animals could traverse deserts that would kill horses, could go longer without water, and could carry heavy loads. The camel was the technology that made the Silk Road possible. The cities along the Silk Road became centers of immense economic power and influence. Cities along the Silk Road evolved into significant economic hubs where wealth and prosperity flourished as traders and merchants passed through, making them centers of power that rivaled the great capitals of empires. Samarkand, Kashgar, and other trading cities became so wealthy and powerful that they could negotiate with emperors as equals. The wealth generated by the Silk Road created a new class of merchants who wielded political power. These cities were not dependent on a single empire, they were independent economic powers. The wealth generated by the Silk Road had profound effects on the global economy. The Silk Road led to a redistribution of wealth across regions, as goods flowed from one civilization to another, creating new patterns of economic power and prosperity that transformed the political landscape of Eurasia. Before the Silk Road, wealth was concentrated in a few great empires. The Silk Road dispersed wealth, creating new centers of economic power in Central Asia and along the trade routes. This redistribution of wealth had political consequences: new powers rose, old powers declined, and the balance of power shifted. The proliferation of certain goods had effects that extended far beyond commerce. The proliferation of goods such as paper and gunpowder along the Silk Road greatly affected the trajectory of world history, as these technologies spread from their origins in China to transform societies across Asia, the Middle East, and eventually Europe. Paper revolutionized record-keeping and administration. Gunpowder revolutionized warfare. These were not mere commodities, they were transformative technologies that changed the course of human history. The Silk Road was the vehicle through which these world-changing innovations spread. The mechanics of Silk Road trade required sophisticated systems of credit, trust, and communication. Merchants along the Silk Road developed systems of credit, letters of exchange, and trading partnerships that allowed them to conduct business across vast distances without physically carrying all their wealth, creating the foundations of modern banking and finance. A merchant in Chang'an could write a letter that would be honored in Baghdad. A trading partnership established in one generation could be continued by the next. These systems of trust and credit were as important to the Silk Road as the physical routes themselves. The specific routes that merchants chose were determined by a complex calculus of safety, profit, and political relationships. Merchants carefully chose their routes based on current political situations, seasonal weather patterns, known dangers, and the locations of friendly trading partners, constantly updating their knowledge as conditions changed. The Silk Road was not a fixed network, it was constantly adapting. A route that was safe one year might be dangerous the next due to war or bandit activity. Merchants had to be constantly informed, constantly alert to changes in the political and natural environment. The dangers of the Silk Road were not abstract, they were concrete and immediate. The Gobi Desert was arguably the biggest danger of the Silk Road, with merchants facing extreme temperatures, sandstorms, mirages, and the constant threat of becoming lost in an ocean of sand that could kill even the most experienced travelers. The Gobi was not just a physical obstacle, it was a test of human endurance and will. Many merchants did not survive the crossing. Those who did emerged changed by the experience, with stories of hardship and survival that would be told for generations. The protection of goods and merchants required careful strategy and planning. Merchants could not rely on armed guards to protect them against all possible dangers. Instead, they developed strategies of traveling in large groups, maintaining good relationships with local rulers, and choosing routes that minimized exposure to bandits and natural hazards. An armed caravan would be too expensive and could never defend itself against all possible threats. Instead, merchants relied on numbers, on relationships, and on careful route planning. They paid taxes and tolls to local rulers in exchange for protection. They traveled in groups for mutual support and defense. The economic impact of the Silk Road extended to the smallest details of daily life. Variations in climate, region, wealth, and class all had a large effect on the daily lives and habits of the inhabitants of Central Asia, resulting in changing patterns of consumption, dress, diet, and cultural practice based on access to Silk Road goods. A wealthy merchant in Samarkand might eat Indian spices, wear Chinese silk, and drink Persian wine. A poor laborer might have access to none of these luxuries. The Silk Road created new forms of inequality and new forms of status based on access to exotic goods. The time frame of Silk Road trade was remarkably long and stable. For nearly 2,000 years, merchants traveled along the Silk Road routes which ran from China in the east to destinations such as Constantinople and the Mediterranean, making the Silk Road one of the longest-lasting trade networks in human history. This longevity is remarkable. Most trade routes are disrupted by wars, by political changes, by the rise and fall of empires. Yet the Silk Road persisted through all of these upheavals. This persistence speaks to the fundamental human desire to trade, to connect, and to exchange. The role of caravanserais in facilitating trade cannot be overstated. The inland routes of the Silk Roads were dotted with caravanserais, large guest houses or hostels that were designed to welcome traveling merchants and their caravans, providing shelter, food, water, and protection that made long-distance travel feasible and survivable. These caravanserais were not luxurious, they were functional. But they were essential. Without them, merchants could not have traveled the long distances required by the Silk Road. The caravanserais were the infrastructure that made the Silk Road possible. And here is a final, contemplative thought as we conclude this segment. The Silk Road demonstrates that commerce, when conducted with fairness and mutual respect, can be a force for connection, understanding, and shared prosperity that benefits all parties involved. The Silk Road was not perfect, there was exploitation, there was inequality, there was suffering. But at its best, it was a network where merchants from different civilizations could meet, exchange goods, share knowledge, and build relationships based on mutual benefit. This is a lesson that remains relevant in our modern world, where commerce continues to connect distant peoples and shape the course of human history. Rest now, traveler. Let the gentle sounds of coins clinking and merchants haggling fade into the distance as sleep draws near. You have journeyed deep into the economic heart of the Silk Road, understanding not just the grand narratives but the specific mechanisms through which this ancient network functioned. The Silk Road was built not by abstract forces but by individual merchants making individual decisions, by small acts of trade that accumulated into a vast network of connection and exchange.